Well, now it's time to talk about human origins, the origins of humankind. To do that, I'm going to look at the work of one writer, a man named Hesiod. You see his name there towards the center of the screen, Hesiod. Hesiod is a writer. He's writing about 750 BC. He's writing about the same time as Homer. We'll be talking much more about Homer later on in the semester. But about 750 BC, he writes a book called the Theogony. He writes another book as well, but the Theogony is what we're talking about right now. In Hesiod's Theogony, well, you might remember that word theogony. I gave it to you a few presentations ago. It literally means the birth of the gods. But Hesiod's Theogony also contains the cosmogony that I gave you earlier in an earlier presentation. It tells the story of the birth of the gods, all the way from chaos to Zeus. All of that is contained in Hesiod's Theogony. But Hesiod also tells us two stories of human origins. Two completely different stories of human origins, back to back, with no break or no seeming concern on his part that he tells us two completely different stories of human origins. The first of these stories I'm calling Prometheus, because he's the main character. The second of these stories I'm calling The Ages of Humankind. That's actually what Hesiod calls the second story. It bothers some students to have two different stories in one book talking about human origins. It really shouldn't. It's not all that uncommon. If you're familiar with the Old Testament, you know there are four creation stories in the Old Testament. Genesis 1:1 through Genesis 2:4, Genesis 2:4 through the rest of Genesis 3, Job 38 through 42, and Psalm 104. Four different stories, two of them in the same book, right next back to each other. They're different stories because they are different styles of literature. Genesis 1 and Job 38 and Psalm 104 are poetry. So they tell a poetic story. It didn't bother Moses to have two stories next to each other. It doesn't bother Hesiod to have two stories next to each other. If there's interest, I may put together a short presentation, probably an optional presentation on the Hebrew creation stories, and my own take on them, if anybody cares. Probably not, but I may make that available. But anyway, we have two different myths of human origin, two very different stories, and we start off with Prometheus.